The former U.S. National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has died at the age of 100. Under President Richard Nixon, Kissinger was a key figure in opening up diplomatic ties with Communist China back in the 1970s. But he's also been accused of war crimes for supporting repressive dictatorships, especially in Latin America, as well as bombing campaigns in Southeast Asia. Mike Hanna looks back on his life.
At the age of 100, Henry Kissinger was still globe-trotting, meeting the Chinese president in Beijing.
You've just celebrated your 100th birthday, and I wish you a long and healthy life.
It is a great privilege to be able to visit China.
Significantly, he was also granted a meeting with the defense minister, a man sanctioned by the US who had refused any form of communication with Biden administration officials, including his opposite number in the Pentagon. It was 52 years since Kissinger had first held secret meetings with Chinese leaders when he was the US National Security Advisor. And then,
I know all of you will want to hear from the new Secretary of State.
There is no country in the world where it is conceivable that a man of my origins could be standing here next to the President of the United States.
Kissinger was born in Germany in 1923. He and his family fled the Nazis in 1938, eventually settling in the US. He joined the army during World War II, using his language skills in military intelligence. After the war, Kissinger earned a doctorate in political science at Harvard, his ambition to shape US foreign policy. Kissinger got his chance when he joined the Nixon White House in 1969, where his job was to help end the war in Vietnam. He oversaw the secret carpet bombing campaign in Cambodia. It's estimated as many as 1 million people were killed. Opponents of the war say Kissinger should have been tried for war crimes. He never apologized.
I'm certainly was strongly supportive of it. It was correct, and it was in the American interest.
On Christmas Day 1972, the US launched an air war on North Vietnam to convince Hanoi to resume peace talks.
Mr. President, within 10 days you got these guys to the table, which no other method could have done.
This led to the 1973 Paris Peace Accords and a Nobel Peace Prize for Kissinger. But the war didn't end until 1975. The Nixon administration saw Vietnam as key to stopping the spread of communism. But when it came to the Soviet Union and China, Kissinger persuaded Nixon to try détente, in other words, a slight defrosting of the Cold War. The result? Washington and Moscow negotiated their first arms control treaties. And Nixon visited China in 1972. For Kissinger, this was all about giving the US a tactical advantage.
Our strategy was to position ourselves in such a way that we were closer to Soviet Union and China than they were to each other. So that in every crisis, we had more options than they did.
Meanwhile, Kissinger was still fighting the Cold War in South America and Europe, backing military governments in Chile, Greece, and Argentina. He denied supporting the coup which deposed Chilean President Salvador Allende in 1973, leading to the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet.
There was no policy since to assassinate any foreign official.
Secret White House recordings later revealed that Kissinger knew the CIA helped Pinochet launch the coup, and that he had cancelled the State Department's warnings to Pinochet's government against killing political opponents. His defense?
Sometimes statesmen have to choose among evils.
Kissinger invented the use of shuttle diplomacy to help broker an end to the 1973 war between Israel and Egypt, creating the foundation for the 1978 Camp David Accords. After Nixon resigned in 1974, Kissinger continued as Secretary of State under President Gerald Ford, and spent the remaining decades of his life as an informal advisor to world leaders and corporations. To his critics, a warmonger, to his admirers, a consummate diplomat, but recognized by all as a man who changed the course of history.
I speak now to Steve Clemons. He's the host of Al Jazeera's weekly show, The Bottom Line, and is the founding editor-at-large at Semafor, which is a new digital media platform. He joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Thank you for your time. So Henry Kissinger was both celebrated and controversial. Can you put his legacy in shaping foreign affairs into perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there was no more influential foreign policy intellectual and participant than Henry Kissinger. He shaped the entire modern era, not just since the end of the Cold War, but before the Cold War. His book on nuclear weapons and foreign policy in the 1950s became the seminal document at that time on how to think about nuclear weapons. This is before the opening to China, before détente with Russia, and before many of his misdeeds. He is reviled around the world by many for having no filter for human rights and embracing autocrats and thugs. But he is celebrated by those who see that he diffused major tensions in the world, particularly with Russia at a key moment, but also China, and led to a very different path at that time. And I think many people today who look at the complexities in the world, there are a lot of human rights atrocities in the world, but they're asking, where is the realist today who can help negotiate and channel between powers in the world that are emerging? And I think what's interesting is that Kissinger, as controversial as he was, never stopped being consequential. Even in April, when going to China, meeting Xi Jinping, when America and China were clearly on a divergent path and perhaps on a train wreck course, he stepped in and basically set a floor on that relationship, reminding both sides how fundamentally globally consequential that relationship was. So he was not loved, and I knew Henry Kissinger. I was the first director of the Nixon Center in Washington in the early 1990s, and Henry was my co-chairman of my board. So I had a lot of interaction with him, and he was a man who knew he had a place in history, who was worried how that was going to be, but he continued. He was worried how it would be shaped and who would attack him, but yet he didn't, at another level, care that much.
And Steve, he was, of course, a Holocaust survivor, born in Germany and then later moved as a young child to America. How do you think that shaped his life and choices?
Well, I think it made him realize how fragile life and status and title was. He felt that his father was humiliated, came to this country with nothing. And if anything, and when I talked to Dr. Kissinger, I think it became clear that he became an overachieving person, someone who took everything he did incredibly seriously. He outran his competition, and he was someone who always made whatever role or job he had something consequential.
Steve, good to get your personal perspective. Steve Clemons, the host of Al Jazeera's weekly show, The Bottom Line.